Good afternoon, everybody. Here we are on September 23rd for our webinar. And so with that, we have two primary items on the agenda. We're going to start with this Tebby Bowman, who's going to talk about and present on operating procedures updates. Tebby, are you there? Give me just another moment. Okay, Tebby, are you able to present?
I can turn on my sound and my video now, so that's good. And let me share my screen. Give me just one moment. It says that feature is disabled, so I cannot share my screen.
All right, give me just a moment. Okay, give it another go.
All righty. Let's see. Okay.
We can see it.
Fantastic. All right, so this is an update on the 2021-2022 special education operating procedures and what we're going to be doing this year for the LEAs. Let's have a little review first. For last year, 2020-2021, there were 3 operating procedures: child find, evaluation, and FAPE. So beginning that year, the LEAs were required to upload or link special education operating procedures and LEA local procedures to the legal framework website. And this is to ensure that all LEAs have policies, programs, and procedures that are meeting IDEA's child find and FAPE requirement. So for this year, 2021-2022, we are still going to have child find, evaluation, and FAPE. The LEAs are required to upload or link special education operating procedures in these 3 same areas. There will be no additional operating procedures for the 2021-2022 school year, and these need to be completed by October 29th of 2021. Again, just a reminder, these need to be completed by October 29th, 2021. The LEAs may still access and use the same templates that they used last year in the areas of child find, evaluation, and FAPE for the 2021-2022 school year. Just like last year, the LEAs are not required to use the templates provided in the legal framework. The LEAs may use a local templates, or they can use a purchased product. If the LEA decides to opt out of using the templates that are provided in the legal framework, then the LEAs must ensure that the uploaded or linked operating procedures still contain the elements that are consistent with the available templates. So far, there's really not any changes. The LEAs are expected to review their operating procedures that they uploaded last year, review them in the areas of child find, evaluation, and FAPE to verify that the content in each area remains accurate and is in compliance with state and federal regulations in these areas, and make any needed revisions to ensure the most current version is uploaded or linked in the legal framework. If the LEA determines that there are no updates needed, then no further action is required. For additional information related to the required special education operating procedures for the 2021-2022 school year, please visit the recent TEA guidance page. Moving on to 2022-2023, the operating procedures for this next school year, not the current one, but the next one. The timeline for uploading or linking the special education operating procedures will return to the pre-COVID-19 pandemic requirement. That means that the requirement for completion will be in August, not October. The due date for the 2022-2023 school year, uploading or linking of the special education operating procedures to the legal framework will be on or before August 31st, 2022. Additional operating procedures will be required in the 2022-2023 school year, so it won't just be the 3, there will be extras for the following school year, not the current one. And the LEAs will be provided information on additional operating procedures required, including new templates, guidance, and training no later than June of 2022. Are there any questions? If anybody decides that they do have a question, I'll put my email in the chat and you can email me if something comes up. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Bowman. And with that, we're going to turn to item 2 on the agenda, which is Mandy Young and Don Vanderheuvel, who are going to present on updates to 19 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 89.
Thanks, Leo. Hi, everyone. My name is Mandy Young, and I'm a professional development manager here at TEA. I'm in the Strategic Integrations Division. And I have with me Don. Don, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, you're on mute, Don.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure, no
Hello,
problem.
everyone. I'm Dawn. I'm the Child Find and Evaluation Coordinator in the Division of Special Education Programs, Technical Assistance. I work with the Child Find, Evaluation, and Art Supports Network. Mandy, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Don. So Don and I are going to talk to you today. As some of you already know, there were some proposed rule changes back in June. And today we're going to discuss those updates to Chapter 89 for special populations. So let's get into it. Okay. We decided to present these changes to you today in order to increase your understanding of the Chapter 89 updates and help you determine if and how those changes might impact your practice, and then identify any implications that these changes might present. So here's a timeline. Let's talk about the timeline for these changes. Just to give you some background, back in June, there was a proposed rule change that was published in the Texas Register. Then between June 4th and July 5th, there was a public comment period where people could go and read about the proposed changes. They can make suggestions through comments and make those changes, And then on June 15th and 17th, there were public hearings. Then on September 15th, the rule was filed with the Texas Register. On October 1st, the changes to those rules, all of the ones that have been approved, will be published in the Texas Register, and then they'll be effective on October 5th of this year. So there's a link to the register, to the Texas Register. I'm going to see if I can drop that into the chat right now so that you can go there. If you want to find out, it's not published yet. Dang it, I can't get it. It's not published yet, but it will be. And I'm going to get the link for that. Copy this link so that you can go and check it out.
I dropped it in for you, Mandy.
Oh, thanks, Deanna. I was having a hard time. Thank you. All right, let me get back to the slideshow. Okay, so if you want to go to the Texas Register and look this up, you can look it all up. I don't think it's posted yet. I think it's just the proposed changes right now, but eventually it will be posted by October 5th. So this presentation is just a high level summary of the types of changes that are made in Chapter 89. So what I'm going to discuss today is the updating of the terminology to implement that Senate Bill 281. And then Dawn is going to go over the eligibility determinations for specific learning disabilities and the changes to the provision for students who are eligible for special education and related services, and then who enroll during the summer. So there have been changes about that. The other pieces that are under that dotted line were changed in Chapter 89, and they have to do with conforming edits related to funding for special education that align with the Texas Education Code 48102. And then there were changes related to updating cross-references. However, we're not going to get into that information today because that information doesn't really impact practice. But again, you're welcome to read through those changes when Chapter 89 is posted. If you're super interested in that, just go to that link that Deanna posted for you in the chat, and you can you can read all into it. Okay, so there's a lot to talk about today. So to make it a bit easier, we made some icons that you can follow for the presentation. The first one is that text removed. You'll see a purple icon, and you can tell that the letter T is being moved out of the box to indicate that the text was removed. If there was a change in language, you'll see a red icon. So there's an X through that black letter T, and then 2 arrows that lead to a new yellow letter T showing a change. And then lastly, if the new language was added to Chapter 89, you'll see a green icon with a black letter T and a plus sign to indicate that's right, there's more text. So let's move on to the first part of Chapter 89. On this next slide, you're going to see a red icon because there was a change in language. So you can see on this slide, the grayed out text explains Chapter 89 prior to the change that was proposed, which is in the black text. This part of Chapter 89, 1040 addresses eligibility criteria. So auditory impairment will now be identified in eligibility criteria as deaf or hard of hearing. So you can see anywhere in Chapter 89 where it's stated auditory impairment, it's now been changed. This is going to impact future and current students who will be identified as deaf or hard of hearing. And it will be important to talk to all of your staff about this change in order to use this terminology for future communications. So here's just another example showing that throughout Chapter 89, you will now see all the references to auditory impairment are replaced with deaf or hard of hearing. The change in language to use deaf or hard of hearing was actually from a Senate Bill 281 that was passed in 2019 as part of the 2019 legislative session. These updates in Chapter 89 just update the language to align with the bill requirements. So you can see all of this similar language in all of the changes, and you can see on the bottom there, it says in Chapter 89, 1035, 1050, 1121, 1131. Those all have changes that say auditory impairments are now deaf and hard of hearing. And we included this example, and if you're super interested, you can go back and see where they all have been changed if you check out that register site. Okay, so what does this mean? And how is it going to change language? How is this change going to impact practice? Well, in summary, first, the term deaf or hard of hearing will now replace auditory impairment. So make sure that your district policies, procedures, documents reflect all of this new language. And then of course, you want to inform your staff of the term change, as well as ensure that the change is in all of your future communications. So that's pretty easy. And the next part, Dawn is going to talk about. And so I'm going to hand it over to her to talk about all the other changes from chapter 89.
Thanks, Mandy, and thanks for navigating the slides. I surely appreciate it. The next change we want to talk to you about is found at 89.1040, and we'll begin at 9, which addresses eligibility criteria for specific learning disability. The change you see on this slide simply adds the definition of specific learning disability from IDEA at the beginning of the section on SLD. This addition did not change the definition of SLD. It just makes it so the language from IDEA also appears in our state rule. You will see other changes today where language from IDEA was added to chapter 89. But there are some changes to this section on SLD that may impact practice. We're going to talk about those next. Chapter 89 tells us that one of the ways you can identify a specific learning disability is through a response to intervention process. As you can see on the slide, some language from IDEA was added, which clarifies that this insufficient progress is with meeting age or grade level standards. There is also elimination of some text that results in this section really mirroring IDEA language. Although there are changes here, they will likely have little impact on practice because the central idea of using a process based on the child's response to research-based intervention remains. Even if an LEA does not use an RTI approach for SLD identification, multidisciplinary evaluation teams should incorporate all available progress monitoring data from research-based intervention into each student's comprehensive evaluation as one of the multiple sources of data. And we're on to the next slide. The other way that SLD can be determined is through a pattern of strengths and weaknesses in performance, achievement, or both. Please notice that the underlined language on the left, as indicated by significant variance among specific areas of cognitive function, such as working memory and verbal comprehension, or between specific areas of cognitive function and academic achievement, has been removed. This change aligns the language to the requirements in IDEA and essentially broadens the way of thinking about a pattern of strengths and weaknesses. We're going to look more closely at this change in the next slide, as there are potential practice implications. Let's break down the changes to patterns of strengths and weaknesses a bit further. I'm going to read this slide. If you do need a pattern of strengths and weaknesses in performance, achievement, or both. That pattern is relative to age, grade level standards, or intellectual development. You do not need significant variance among specific areas of cognitive functioning or between specific areas of cognitive function and academic achievement. We're going to spend a few minutes now on this slide. Before the change, some LEAs interpreted that significant variance or a discrepancy between cognitive functioning and achievement alone was sufficient and necessary for the identification of SLD. For example, there were specific instances reported to the agency where students identified with dyslexia were found not eligible under SLD solely because they did not demonstrate an area of weakness in their cognitive profiles, despite other data demonstrating a pattern of strengths and weaknesses and overall need. These situations indicated that the section of code that has been eliminated was inhibiting the ARD committee's use of all data available and creating an over-reliance on specific data and calculations based on cognitive assessments. Essentially, this section of rule was interpreted as requiring one or more specific weaknesses in the student's cognitive profile to identify a pattern. Now, a pattern is no longer so narrowly defined. In summary, the elimination of, as indicated by significant variance among specific areas of cognitive function, such as working memory and verbal comprehension, or between specific areas of cognitive function and academic achievement, essentially broadens the way of looking at all the student's data in analyzing patterns of strengths and weaknesses. Evaluation teams and ARD committees have more space to view the various data sources in their totality and as equally important without an overemphasis on cognitive scores. We understand that many LEAs use various approaches when determining a pattern of strengths and weaknesses. Various approaches are still permitted. However, LEAs must be careful that if they are using approaches that include scoring software that identifies discrepancies, they must be mindful that those discrepancy scores or lack of discrepancy scores cannot be used as the sole data source for ruling in or ruling out a specific learning disability. These approaches are tools, but the calculations cannot supersede the preponderance of data that is available. Again, evaluation teams and ARD committees must use all the data and information on a student to make informed decisions that are supported by that data. No single piece of data is more important than others. The unintended consequence of that previous piece of code that has now been eliminated was that cognitive scores obtained in a one-time testing situation were more important to the determination of SLD than the other sources of data that were accumulated, particularly academic achievement and performance data. Let's look at the next slide. So let's review the impact and implications that accompany the changes to SLD eligibility. If you'll look at the first bullet, there is no substantive change to practice for the RTI process. Remember, even if an LEA is not using an RTI process, evaluation teams should incorporate any available progress monitoring data from interventions in the FIE. The second bullet, the change broadens the ways a pattern of strengths and weaknesses can be identified to better align with the idea. The use of a pattern of strengths and weaknesses has broadened. Previously, when a significant variance was applied, the use of a pattern of strengths and weaknesses was narrowed beyond the intent of federal regulations. Third bullet, the change helps clarify that multiple sources of data are considered when making determinations. While the use of multiple sources of data is not new to practice, their use has been strengthened. No single source of data is more important than another. The fourth bullet, one score or calculation cannot supersede the preponderance of data gathered as part of the comprehensive evaluation. And we'll say it again, no single score or calculation may be used to determine an SLD. Please be especially aware of not using any single calculation when determining the presence of an SLD. And finally, our last bullet, please inform staff of the changes and look for additional training and guidance on comprehensive evaluation of SLD from the Child Find Evaluation and Arts Supports Network. We've provided the website address for you. And a little more information, because I'm sure many questions are bubbling up. The Child Find Evaluation and Arts Supports Network will provide a recorded webinar on evaluating dyslexia in the FIE at the beginning of November 2021. So it's very soon. In January 2022, when we return from the holiday break, shortly thereafter, the network will provide a guidance document on the comprehensive evaluation of SLD, including dyslexia. So let's look at the next slide. Here we have a couple more changes still in the area of SLD eligibility. At the top of the before change column, we see that the phrase prior to was removed, so that now instead of the code reading prior to and as part of, it now reads as part of, and goes on to talk about the requirement to consider database documentation of repeated assessments of achievement. This change attempts to eliminate any confusion that there is a requirement to engage in an intervention with progress monitoring prior to an evaluation. And the phrase, which must be provided to the student's parents, was added. This brings in state rule that which already exists in IDEA. So let's look at impact and implications. So what are the implications of the changes? Really, they should be minimal, as these changes just align with requirements elsewhere, but you will want to ensure that local policies and procedures do not require movement through a tiered intervention process prior to referral for evaluation when a disability and need for special education is suspected. Also, please ensure that local policies and procedures require the provision of achievement and evaluation of students' progress to their parents. Let's go to the next slide. And here we have another change to Chapter 89, still in the area of SLD eligibility. You will see that the IDEA requirement for an observation in the student's learning environment has been added to the state rule. And what are the impact and implications? An observation in the learning environment was already required as part of the evaluation for a specific learning disability. This change integrates federal IDEA language into the state rules. No impact on current evaluation practices is anticipated. Let's look at the next one. And on this slide, we have the final change in the area of SLD eligibility. You will see that the IDEA requirements for members of the evaluation team has been added. So let's look at implications on the next slide. This change aligns the state rules with existing federal requirements. The language from IDEA is customized to reflect Texas content. In other words, using the terms licensed specialist in school psychology, educational diagnostician. No impact to current evaluation practices is anticipated. Let's move to the next slide. Now we are moving to a different section of the chapter. This is a change at 89.1050. Specifically, you will notice that section J4 was added. This is a new piece of code that was added to clarify enrollments during the summer months. For students who enroll in an LEA during the summer, they are not considered a transfer student. These students are unlike those students who enroll during the school year. As you can see in the underlined text on the right, students who enroll in the district during the summer must have an IEP implemented on the first day of school, either the IEP from the previous district or an IEP developed by the ART committee. So let's look at the next slide for impact and implications. Let's look at the next slide, if that's okay. Thank you. Language was added to 89.1050 J4. It clarifies that students who enroll in an LEA over the summer with an IEP from a previous district must have an IEP in place on the first day of school. Remember, they are not considered a transfer student. You will need to update your LEA board policies and procedures to ensure students who enroll in the summer have an IEP in place on the first day of school. Also, please communicate with applicable staff to ensure students who enroll over the summer are not treated as transfer students for the purposes of our federal regulations and now our state rules. And on our last slide, we've come to the end of this webinar. Thank you for joining us today. You can contact TEA at special education, that's all one word, at tea.texas.gov. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the TEA website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn and Mandy. And the slide deck will also get posted, although it might take a day or two for that to actually get on the website. I was going to ask the rest of the team if there are any closing comments. Okay, thank you all very much for attending, and that's going to conclude our webinar today. Thank you very much for being here.